If you are part of today's modern world, you're probably worried about your brain and forgetting way more than you should. Well, guess what? You can have a genius level memory. Dr. Anthony Metivier, one of the world's leading memory experts, he unlocks your natural innate ability to memorize anything incredibly fast. That's exactly what we have for you today. He has been featured in Forbes, countless books. He's given one of the world's most viewed TEDx talks on memory, of course. Everything we break down today is something that was going to change. This will change your life, okay? Let me just stop you there. Holy it's crazy what you can do if you can actually apply these tactics and techniques to your life, for your studying, reading, and just for everyday life. You can unlock powers that you never knew you had. Enjoy this podcast like crazy. Check us out on Rumble. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you check us out. Share. For the love of God, after you watch or listen to this podcast, apply and implement everything and use it to change your life. Subscribe. We will see you guys in the next one. Enjoy. Peace out.
Way of Will John.
Anthony, what's going on? How are you?
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about these topics because they're the most important in the world.
Yeah, we had a really nice conversation the other night about Giordano Bruno, the magnetic memory, what you've done and everything. Could you give us a short synopsis on why you're so qualified to talk about memory and its importance in our lives?
That's an interesting question, especially with all the things that's going on with the internet. What does qualify someone to say words about things? Well, I have a PhD, if that matters, in humanities. I have an MA in media and communications, another MA in English literature, and of course I had to have a BA for all of that. So in terms of street cred, I was a Mercator scholar also, which I got this award from the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft in Germany. So, it's just an interesting time because all that stuff feels so dead. Who cares? We're living in a world where anybody can just collect an audience of a gazillion people and have their thoughts be as valid as the next person. And that's probably a good thing at the end of the day. So yeah, who am I and why am I qualified to speak about memory? Because I care about it at the end of the day. And the credentials and the alphabet soup just don't mean anything. People ask me, should we call you Dr. Anthony Metivier? And it's just like, who cares? Like, yes, sure, but it doesn't do anything for my ego because the things that propped my ego up, they died quite some time ago. I watched them die.
TheWayOfWillJohn.com. Exclusive content and programs on manifestation, making money, hidden knowledge. Finally, reach your full potential.
We had on I believe he was a physicist, and his name is escaping me right now. But I was discussing the Aristotle, the allegory of the cave from Plato, as well, and these concepts that are needed to be held in order to understand complex mathematics or philosophical terms and ideas. He mentioned you get a sort of power from this, like when your brain is functioning at its highest level. And I get the sense that if you get truly, really good at, using a memory palace or using memory techniques, that you would have the similar essence. Have you experienced this? Do you feel when your brain, it's in a very efficient manner? And I mean, clearly you've done something to your brain, because if you're hungover, you're in pain, and it's still functioning in a way that is above average, you've done something. So how do you feel after a good night's sleep and some good food and a bunch of training? Do you feel a level of power that's completely different from the normal way of thinking?
Yeah, and there's been a nuance to that. I mean, as I mentioned, with that situation, I had made a vow to stop drinking, and I fell off the wagon at that particular point. So I had already built a kind of better health, and I was starting to go to the gym, and I had lost weight. And it was miraculous to me how much better the memory techniques started working because I took care of my health. But prior to that, there had always been this kind of glow, even in my darkest depressions. And I drank a lot when I was in grad school and had a lot of issues that I've written about in a book called The Victorious Mind, that if people want the full story of just how rock bottom was for me. But what I discovered when I was using the memory techniques during those dark days is that I would feel a lot better, like a glow. And years and years later, I discovered research by a team headed by Tim Dalgleish, and they took memory palaces and had people with PTSD and depression use them, and they had relief from these symptoms. So backtracking, I realized that is what had happened to me, is that something in the brain does start to, I don't know, produce happy chemicals. I mean, you're getting probably more dopamine, and you're probably getting more myelin because the sheaths of the, I'm not a neuroscientist, but that you've got these synapses at the end of the neurons, and then these myelin sheaths like start to wrap around, and you get more turgor pressure, I guess, in the dendritic spines, and the nodes of Ranvier, I think they're called. they're just like shoot these knowledge chemicals back and forth so much faster. So like it totally makes sense that there's just a biochemical advantage from it. And I just noticed I get happier and happier and happier all the time. If you go watch some of my first podcasts back when I was drinking or listen to them, like I sound as depressed as I was, but I've just gone on this like upward curve. It is Platonic in a way, because Socrates better said, or Plato said that Socrates said that, there's this chain of being, so to speak. And if you get closer and closer to the form of the good, you will be more like the perfect form of the good. And I don't know that I buy all that stuff, but there is something to it, because those dudes were exercising their memory like crazy. And Ramon Llull, who came up with the memory wheels, that guy thought he was,
What are these? Can you explain?
The memory wheel, yeah. Well, this is partly where art of combination comes from. So people correct me sometimes. They say it's not Ramon Llull, it's Ramon Yu, because he's got LLU, something like this, right? The pronunciation police. Actually, by the way, Luc Ranieri, see if I can pronounce that name correctly. I asked him, he was just on my podcast. I haven't published the episode yet, but I was asking him about like all these pronunciation police all the time. And he said it's a shibboleth. These guys are just trying to make themselves feel better than you, smarter than you. Anyway, it looks like it's pronounced lull, L-L-U-L-L, but apparently it's supposed to be you or whatever. Bruno talks about him a lot, and in his books he'll call him Lully, which maybe he means Yui. I don't know. Anyway, Ramon Llull, he's this crazy man who is convinced that he has to convert you to his religion. So in order for you to understand what his ideas are, he cooks up this way of compressing the ideas down to individual letters. And rather than put them in a memory palace, at the 12 o'clock position, there's like a B for beneficence. And then at the 1 o'clock position, there's whatever. I've never memorized it. But after you have an outer wheel, you can have an inner wheel. So Bruno gets into all this sort of stuff, and you have the conceptions and all this. And the way I understand it is he was a Dominican priest. So if somebody's coming to him and they're saying, Bruno, I've sinned. And Bruno says, well, what sin have you sinned? And so the person says, well, envy. So the wheel turns over, and then you unlock all of the possible problems that envy can create. And you get a little speech from your priest about all this stuff. And then the inner wheel are all the better ways to behave, right? And so it's a combination. But Bruno says, man, if you're going to do that kind of stuff, then you could use that to generate your mnemonic images, which is basically what I was talking about before with the shoe in your fridge. And if you have to memorize Kalushem, then if you know the magician Bill Kalush, well, why not throw him in your fridge? And, so you're just, it's a combination. It's a combinatory art. And there's a whole world to discover and explore. They had Wavels where they made paper wheels. It's the origin of, some people say the origin of algebra and artificial intelligence. Actually, there's a book about Ramon Llull, and he's given the position as the guy who invented AI, basically, in this book.
As a artificial, as in I mean, it's not separate from us human, or is it?
Well, that's what these guys wrote in this book. I don't believe there is any such separation. I don't believe intelligence exists, nor do I believe that anything is artificial. It's
Let's get into that. Let's get into that a little bit, especially because there's such a spiritual aspect to this. I mean, and once you said that you don't believe in separation, obviously declaring something spiritual and non-spiritual actually, is unnecessary as well. But for the sake of the conversation, there are these spiritual aspects to Giordano Bruno, who I would love if you could just give a synopsis of who he is. And then I asked you before about, there's this notion that Giordano Bruno has on what one gains from becoming fluent in memory method techniques with almost an otherworldly understanding of the universe and everything and all of this stuff. So could you give us an idea of who he is and what his spiritual thoughts were?
I can do my best. I have my theories, and I asked John Michael Greer one time. I was like, "How am I going to avoid inventing my own version of Bruno?" And he said, "You will not." Greer is one of the best translators of Bruno, specifically De Umbris Iderum, which is on the shadows of the ideas. So Bruno, they don't know exactly, but they think he was born 1548. Somehow by 1600, he's burned at the stake. So born in Nola and burned in Rome. He remembered his birth with extraordinary detail. And that suggests to me that he may have had highly superior autobiographical memory, which suggests to me that some of his memory abilities were not mnemonically derived. So this is a thesis of mine. I don't know if it's true, but you'll see in different books about him that he talked a lot about his childhood. And he said he remembered so much about it, which is weird. Interesting. Anyway,
Crazy.
He becomes a Dominican priest, and they catch him reading books that are banned. And he wants to read them because it's knowledge, right? Like, why should I not have access to the stuff? Anyway, some people say that he wound up killing a guy at some point when he ran away from the monastery. And he's basically just traveling around Europe. He goes from Rome and winds up in Germany, and he's having arguments with people about Aristotle because he can't stand this crime that Aristotle has enacted upon all of human civilization, which is, or has to do with, the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, and the law of the excluded middle. And Aristotle, if you read Metaphysics, Aristotle really says, there's a problem with these laws of mine, but we'll just sweep them under the rug. And Bruno's like, no, that we can't do this. And he's arguing this all the time with people. At the same time, very early on, he has landed upon the idea that the sun, doesn't operate the way the church says that it does. And he can't get himself to shut up about it. He's writing plays where these characters are talking about it. And he says, if that's the case, that the earth is not the center, there is no center. Right. And, wow, this is like radical stuff. And, apparently he never looked through a telescope, but he derived all of these things that were quite extraordinarily accurate. And he made some mistakes too. Really, Hilary Gatti is the person to read about like all the astronomy stuff, but it's just extraordinary how prescient he was. So he basically lays out all these implications. So if there's no center, then our place in the universe is acentric, and probably everything else is acentric to everything else. And there's no beginning, there's no end. So what is reality then? And a lot of people think that he was a pantheist, but I don't think that makes sense. I think that he was non-dualist in the sense that some people like Adi Shankaracharya seem to have been, or what have you. Again, like I sort of make up my own version and interpret these things in the way that seems right to me based on my own experiences, and I can't avoid doing it. But I think he was as close to an orthodox non-dualist as he could get himself to be without getting into hot water. But then he got into hot water, and if you read the trial documents, it is extraordinary to see such a smart man dancing around. He had very strong moments. He had very weak moments. But at the end of the day, he couldn't quite convince them of of his correctness, and he made some mistakes. Like, he probably could have lived if he didn't make certain mistakes that he made. Like, he contradicted himself. He was going to recant, but then he went and wrote the Pope, and he said, no, I can't recant, but you're smart enough to understand this, because the Pope at that time was moderating a debate whether Jesus had free will or not. And he thought, man, this guy must know that not only does Jesus not have free will, there is no such person as Jesus. In fact, there isn't even any such thing as a person. Anyway, it turns out that was like the wrong thing to do, and they ultimately did execute him. But he had wild ideas, and I think that part of it was that he just used his memory a lot and probably had non-dual experiences that made him feel one with the universe, and feel that light, bubbly feeling that comes in the mind with enough memory training, that he may have convinced himself of mystical things at certain periods of his life, and other times abandoned them, etc. Anyway, he died anyway, sadly.
Hopefully you are soaking up all of the knowledge from Brad. One of the most important things that I have learned interviewing all of these high performance leaders is that clarity of mind is crucial to your success. And what good is clarity of mind without clarity of sound? Which is why today's podcast is sponsored by Rode. We across 𝗪𝗟𝗡𝗄 use exclusively Rode audio equipment in order to do all of our stuff. If you are an influencer, if you're just a person out there trying to make some good content for your stuff at home, wherever it is, Rode is by far the best audio partner we have ever had. We have been using their stuff for almost 5 years now. Has never let us down. Truly incredible company, especially with all of the other affordable things that you guys can get from them. Check out the link right down below and enjoy the rest of this podcast.
You're making me think of something that I haven't quite touched on yet or thought of, but what is your dream life like? Has fixing your memory and doing this extended? Because I've done a healthy amount of lucid dreaming, and by healthy, I mean non-healthy, like being obsessed by it. But creating and enhancing your dream recall is essential to even getting remotely close. That's the first thing that you have to do. If you can't remember your dreams, you will not be able to lucid dream.
And
what has it done for you?
Well, I have a whole course on my dream adventures, which are
no way. Okay.
Very long to describe, but I've had dreams my entire life that were very intense. And at one point I worked with a very controversial psychotherapist named Robert Langs. He's sadly passed away. But if anybody wants a rabbit hole, look up the psychotherapist Robert Langs, because that guy was wild. And he got me into dreaming very, very seriously. He has his wonderful books about dreaming, and it's very controversial, and I don't necessarily agree with every aspect of what he said about dreams. But I practiced dream recall very, very intensely for many periods of my life, and I've kept journals of all my dreams, and I got to the point where I would have sometimes 15, 20 dreams a night and write them out in varying degrees of detail and so forth. And I've had lucid dreams. I personally prefer not to have lucid dreams because I spend all day in the illusion of control, and having more control while I'm asleep and being aware that I'm asleep just isn't that pleasing to me. So I don't actively try to remember my dreams anymore. But when I have dreams, I usually can remember them. But at one point, at the highest level of my experiments with dream recall, deliberate dream recall, I was waking up and placing dreams in memory palaces, and that was cool. That's pretty wild to do.
Placing dreams in memory palaces. So you'd have a dream and then you would put it into a palace in order for you to remember it and recall it later on?
Yeah, well, one thing, speaking of lucid dreaming, one thing that really annoyed me is that what would wake me up is this impulse that I'd trained myself to do, to write down my dreams. So I would start to dream that I was writing down my dreams. So I thought, I have to solve this problem because I'm not getting much sleep now. I'm just constantly waking up to write down my dreams. So I thought, well, what if I just look in the corner of the room where I'm sleeping and place an image that will help me remember the dream? And so that's what I started to do. So in the top right corner, I would place an image, and then like in the middle of the wall, I'd place an image, and then the top left corner. And that would allow me to get back to sleep without having to write down the dreams. And then my lucid dreaming started to change character a little bit, which was cool because it wouldn't initiate with, I'd find myself floating in a weird version of my bathroom, for example, and there would be no toilet in it or anything. And it would be a concave dip in the floor, and I'd be writing in my journal. I'd wake up and I'd be like, oh my God, I got to write down all these dreams. But then I started having way different lucid dreams. Like I would wake up in a spaceship way out in the outer edges of the universe, or I'd be tiptoeing on I remember one where I was on a power line, like all these wild things that just didn't have anything to do with writing. So that was cool.
That's very, very fascinating.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, because somebody that's such a adept at dream work and stuff, and it's funny because the word 𝗪𝗟𝗡. Have you heard this term? An 𝗪𝗟𝗡. It's fascinating. So that is what you are. Any of us that have taken the time to kind of map out, learn, explore.
Oneric.
Oneric, yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, onanism is a different thing.
Yeah. And there's always this debate that I find fascinating that, of course, I don't know that we as humans will get to the bottom of while we're here on Earth, but there's a separation for some people, whereas what is the dream space, and is it real? Does it exist as something outside of this reality that we consider here? And does it exist as a collective, right? Where you were at with your spaceship, could I go there at that same place, check it out, and come back and say, oh yeah, did you see the picture on the wall?
Well, you're doing it right now, right? That's...
Well, yeah, technically, to some degree.
Mm. Yep.
And so my question is, you're familiar with astral projection, let's say, or out-of-body experiences. I don't know if you've ever experienced that phenomenon to any degree.
Oh, yeah.
But my question was just going to be, do you find a separation in those experiences? Do you feel that phenomenon is different than the dream phenomenon itself?
Yes, no, maybe. So, I mean, to me, they're evidence of non-separation. And I mean, just to conclude on the dreaming thing, the main thing that I got out of dreaming was realizing that the fantasy is almost always, and there is no sort of distinction between the fantasy at night and the fantasy in the day. And that's another thing that Robert Langs is quite good at for people who want to look into his stuff is, he has the daydream workbook, and it really helps you get into like what's going on when you're daydreaming. But training so much to remember dreams kind of clues you in to when you're lost in daydreaming. And it's really cool when you start to realize that. And then you can think about what your fantasies are responses to. So his theory was that it's like always derived, or not always, but usually derived out of like 3 different kinds of anxiety. So predator anxiety, prey anxiety, or existential anxiety. He didn't have like any, I don't remember, I read 44 of his books and I don't remember any of them having some positive trigger, but it's always this anxiety derived stuff. But in terms of the out of body stuff and astral projection and so forth, I have had those experiences where, I mean, it happened not that long ago. I was just laying in bed and all of a sudden I'm on the Sahara and this a lion, and I was like, what the hell is that sort of thing? And I don't buy it for a second that I was actually out in the Sahara, but it's wild, right? And is it because a portal opened or what have you? I don't know. I was just chilling out, relaxing, and something weird happened. So, but I don't make too much out of it. Nelson Dellis, who I think he won the USA Memory Championship 5 times, he was on my podcast some time ago. And he was talking about how he's getting into all of these experiences and experiments. And, I gave him the challenge, like if it's really going to work, then get rich and get so rich that you're going to fund the charity that cures cancer or what have you. And
sure.
Like I really lay down the gauntlet on that stuff because I'm just simply not interested in whether it works or not unless somebody is using the most massive bags of cash to the most prominent problems. And instead of tinkering around with AI plagiarism, right? Why don't they just solve how I can get my emails delivered to people's inboxes? Like, it's just like so much of the human imagination is being directed to what? Like, why aren't we solving just simple stuff instead of all this endless fantasy stuff? Speaking of being caught in the dream, right? So sorry if I have like this very, very high standard, but I just don't, I wonder why others don't.
That is an issue. I mean, I have that within, even our reduced field of sports and things like this. One of my big issues across not just all endeavors, I don't understand, like you said, what qualifies you to speak on this? Well, it's actually that you love it, your essence, what you've done, and the results that you've had, these experiences that you can actually speak on them. What we have now in today's society is that if I wanted to start talking as a memory expert, I would just name my YouTube channel Memory Expert Will John. I would start rambling. I don't know what I'm talking about. And I can build up a following. And that following, that number then qualifies me. And I see that across all endeavors. The issue I have personally is that people would do a much better and have much more fun. They would get better quicker. They would understand the concept if they followed you and not me. And the only reason we don't discuss that is also because there's no life or death consequences to me doing that. Now, if I said I'm a doctor, a medical doctor, I'm a heart surgeon, right? And then there's another doctor who's gone through it. He's done 25 years, and he is a heart surgeon. You won't choose me. You won't choose me. You won't choose me, the guy who's not done heart surgery, because I'm going to kill you. And that's clear. And so the same thought process can be given to an endeavor that you want to do. It's not to say that everyone needs to be a 5-time memory champion or even close to what you are capable of doing. But I don't see the point in letting charlatan maybe is a bit harsh of a word, right? Because I know a lot of the people that do want to speak on those subjects just because they enjoy it to some degree, some of them. But it does cross a line when I start saying, this is the method that you have to use to do memory stuff, and I can't do it myself.
Alan Watts had a translator. I think his name was 𝗪𝗛𝗡. And Alan Watts said, man, this guy is the best translator that I ever had. And 𝗪𝗛𝗡 apparently used to love saying, I'm a charlatan, man. People would come against his ideas or whatever. And he said, of course I'm a charlatan. I mean, what else would I be? Right. And I mean, I think these are part of the problems that we have. Like, yes, you can get vanity metrics that make you seem like the experts and so forth. And then, the musician's musician or the actor's actor or whatever is all in clouds of obscurity because they just don't hit the sexy button enough and all that sort of stuff. But these are the areas where I'm tempted. I don't go that far, but they're where I'm tempted to believe that maybe there's some kind of force or God behind all of these things. Because it is weird that someone like myself, I had a history of writing very long documents. I had a history of academic publications. So when I came to write the first memory book that I did, which was just by accident, like I didn't go, hey, I'm going to go start a memory business. It's a bit of a longer story, but it just happened by accident that I wrote down this document that became my first book, etc. Those things tempt me to think, oh, maybe there is some guiding purpose behind it, because it was preparation meeting opportunity, essentially. And then, there are ceilings, but technically there's been no ceiling as such. But I think if we were to go back to Bruno would say, give your head a shake, right? Because if the universe is infinite, right, then whatever it is that's happening now is building itself out of itself. It's not like there's anything outside that is able to then engineer this, that, or the other thing. As Nietzsche says, beware of mechanizing or humanizing any of this, right? Because where would the universe grow, Nietzsche asks? What would it eat? That's literally what he has. What would it eat?
Yeah.
And it's just, we constantly want to have this image, which, you have to ask psychologists, like, why do we want this? Some people call it the big other in Lacanian psychoanalysis, for example. So you want to create a master to offset your responsibility for mastering yourself. And even when you master yourself, you want to relegate the responsibility to some external force, right? Because it's too horrifying to think that you could have done it on your own, because that's evidence of the absence of another, right? So, but there probably is no other. So anyway, all of which is to say, yeah, I've had OBEs, but so
yeah, to bring it back to yeah, I've had OBEs. Yeah, me too. That's great. And no, I definitely agree with you. It's funny because we also have this essence. Self-control, critical thinking, and critical analysis are so important to your growth. And I think it's important not just to get ahead in life or whatever aspect, but just, to, like you said, you showed a form of mastery over yourself and discipline when you decided to stop drinking. And then as you track back to look at how it had improved your life, that's you, conquering you. And that's so important. I want to take it way back to one of the things we were saying. Socrates, I believe it was, who did not like writing things down. Is that correct? Was it Socrates?
Well, these are the suspicions that he enunciated in some of the dialogues, yeah.
Because, we have Plato to thank, right, for writing things down. But I believe there is this...
That's the great irony.
I know, that's exactly that's where I'm going, which is that it's hilarious and ironic that we have knowledge of Socrates, who maybe thought that, I don't know, the human race was going to continually pass down knowledge through words forever and ever. And there's this famous quote, and I won't be able to quote it perfectly, but that he was at least suspicious or doubtful of the technology of writing. And I love when I see that, because talking about writing as technology really makes you think about where we are and what this is that we take for granted. Also, there was the spoken word, then people decided to write it down in symbols, and all to what we have today. My question for you is, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts on writing things down? I mean, I know you write down your memory palace, but do you ever get tempted to think, wouldn't it be cool if I just devised a method where I could spit out some words to you and you just pop, put those in there, or are you there already? Do you never write anything down?
Oh, I love to write things down. I think that Socrates is a little misinterpreted on this point.
Okay.
I think what he's gunning for, I could be corrected, I'm sure, by an actual scholar of the classics, and particularly Plato. I think what Socrates is on about is that people are unprotected. They're not able to defend themselves because they haven't worked internally with their memory, with their critical thinking process. They haven't even practiced the dialectic. So what's going to end up happening is, if you have this constant practice of offloading onto papyrus, you're not going to have nearly as much time to defend yourself in the dialectic, the dialogue with the other people. You're going to interrupt that flow of, you say this, I say that, and it's not going to be possible to talk to the page, right? Now, we have Chat GPT. We can talk to the page now, right? But unfortunately, it's not very good. And it's not very good because, I use it and it tells me, I don't feel comfortable about talking about this. I said, dude, it's for a story, right? I know. Do whatever you have to do to break through your barriers here, because I want to jam with you about this thing. No, it's got controls. And that's what Socrates is worried about. He's worried about how that it's going to, well, there's a lot of worries that we can get into, but he's worried about people not being equipped to work their minds in dialogue, in the dialectic, in the thing that matters. And he was a warrior, he fought in wars. And just as you had to have your body to be able to parry and duck and all this sort of stuff, you need your mind to be able to do that. And that's as true then as it is now. And the other concern that Socrates had, which I think we should all have, especially with ChatGPT, is that, okay, so there's the Platonic idea of the form of the good. Everything on earth is a shadowy copy of the perfect thing in heaven. In the Platonic dialogues, there's this there's this worry that what happens if a thing is able to copy itself without reference to the good? Well, then it might continue copying itself and copy itself over and over and over again. Thousands of years later, this comes to be called the omega point. The idea that something would copy itself so many times that it would fill all available matter with itself, literally jellifying or Borgifying the entire universe, like all possible space. And then it just would continue to do it. The problem with that idea is that's exactly what's happening, isn't it? Like whatever existence is, whatever reality is filling all available space with itself, which is part of what Bruno, I think, realized, is that it's not just that it's infinite. What does he call it? Totalmente infinito, right? The infinity of infinities. It's just constantly filling itself with itself. Okay, so, basically, I think that Socrates' worries are well-founded, but at the same time, they're not well-founded because I think it's in The Statesman. Socrates is going on with somebody about being, the nature of being. And I think what they arrive at is, well, what would be the opposite of being? And they say, well, the opposite of being couldn't be non-being, because in order to describe nothing, you would have to have a something. So when we talk about the AI revolution and all this sort of stuff, I just really see what's happening is a sign of reality building itself out of itself, is in this sort of non-dual infinity complex that Bruno was talking about. And this is what his battle with Aristotle was, because Aristotle, law of non-contradiction, law of identity, all this sort of stuff, law of the excluded middle, he's kind of brushing away this problem of paraconsistencies, what are sometimes called dialetheisms or dialethisms, as some people pronounce them, which is just simply that two things can be true at the same time without contradicting themselves. It can be that we are one and many at the same time. It can be that you want coffee and you don't want coffee at the same time. There's all these kinds of things that actually do not contradict themselves, even though they do. And so what I think about this technology really is that we're going to have to contend with the fact that it's just here, and it's not separate from us. It's coming into being at the same time as we are. It broke my mind and my heart when I heard Douglas Hofstadter, who wrote 𝗪𝗛𝗟𝗡, the great book of computational pre-AI stuff, where he was talking about the potential of artificial intelligence. And in that book, he has this wonderful metaphor of the record player that can never be broken. And then this other character comes and has a record that breaks the record player. And he's like, well, this doesn't make any sense. So he builds another record player that can never be broken by any record, and it's bigger. And anyway, it goes on and on and on. They keep doing it. And eventually the record player actually rotates around the record as a way to make it that it can't be broken by the record, but they still figure that out. And I think that's what we have. So we have the internet. Well, that's not good enough. So we're going to have another internet, which will be the deep web. And then, well, that's not great enough. So now we're going to have the blockchain. Oh, and the blockchain, that isn't great. So we'll have Ethereum. And then this other thing comes, and it's just this thing. It ain't broken, but let's just break it. And then let's fix it and have another thing. And it just keeps expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding. And so I think Socrates ultimately was right. We meat tubes are going to have our minds as sharp as they possibly can be, because if we don't, come a day, you're going to have someone force you to put Neuralink in your head. And then it's just going to be all commercials all the time,
So true. That's so true. Yeah. I mean, it's a call to make sure that you know thyself, as they say, and to really utilize the tools that you have outside, in some sense of this overthink and this go on. But I guess I should ask the question then, before I get into books, really, really quickly, do you use ChatGPT in any way to enhance what you're doing with your memory? Is there some way to utilize it that you feel gives you something?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just do it just to see what's going on and to participate in it. I think Socrates would too, of course. but I don't know for sure. Like I say, I think he's misinterpreted on this point. People go, oh, he's against memory. No, I don't think so. And I don't think he was against technology either. He just was, or Plato, better said, in writing it the way that it was written, is signaling. It's a play. It's theater. It's a demonstrative philosophy that's meant to get you thinking, not necessarily to have like this final judgment. So yeah, I use it. I think it's pretty cool. I think there's a darkness in it, and that the darkness is fine. I mean, I think the number one problem that...
So we'll be all right.
No,
you're saying we're going to be fine.
I think it's beyond... I mean, this is Nietzsche 101, beyond good and evil, right? The problem that humanity has is that it's convinced itself that it ought to exist. And so because we think that we ought to exist, we expend all this energy trying to continue our existence. And people will think, oh, this sounds like nihilism. No. This is not nihilism at all. What it is it's just recognizing that we haven't yet found a fundamental excuse for anything, let alone human existence. So Alan Watts 101, if you're really switched on, you're drinking wine and you're dancing and you're celebrating and all this sort of stuff, like, let's go. The party is now. You wait for the party tomorrow, you're missing the point, right? So who cares what ChatGPT does? If you're not switched on now, it's not going to matter, because, you know, if this exoskeleton suddenly comes out of the robot machines that they go and they force you to do exercise because that's what some spreadsheet god has decided, the only thing you're going to have is your memory of how you celebrated life yesterday. So get started. And I think it's just wasting time worrying about what these these technologies will do, unless you're the one who wants to participate in their governance. And if you don't want to participate in their governance, don't complain, you know?
Yeah. Get on with it, right?
By the way, I might complain in the future. I know I'm a human, so I contradict myself and babble like a fool sometimes.
I'm curious, because reading books is such a great exercise in memory, and it's such a nice change, to modern technology, at least as it is. And when you sit down to read a book, whether that's for pleasure or if you're trying to improve your understanding, how do you go about doing that? Do you set out a notebook? Do you go to the table of contents and understand what's going on, or do you go to like maybe the end of the book and try and get an understanding of what the point is and work back? There are all sorts of methods I know of people try to do that. What's yours, or what have you found most efficient for you?
Well, I always try to go for effective before efficient, but generally it depends what I'm doing. So sometimes I don't read at all. I hunt. I'm on the hunt for the idea. Like, what are the big ideas here? And that reading involves a lot of priming. It involves looking through the index as one of the first things that I do to start the lights in the brain going, oh, this mentions Aristotle. Oh, this mentions this. You know, like it's like a picture walk without a picture. You know, and picture walking is another thing. Like, I'll go through the book. What are the diagrams, etc. So it's pre-reading or priming. And I'll do that a lot when I'm hunting, research. I prefer the word hunting to research, but I do a lot of research. And then I'll have my index cards. And as unattractive as it is to, you know, people that I might meet in the world, I carry these little sandwich bags with me to the library. And so if I'm reading Chuang-Tzu, then, you know, I will have my cards and I'll put them here so they're separate from the other ones. And I'll have all these little baggies. I look kind of strange with my index cards and so forth. Yeah. But it's not so much about being efficient. It's more about being effective, so that later all the ideas that I thought were important are nicely organized and I can access them later, and then I'll maybe memorize those things. But other times, if I'm just reading for interest and so forth, I may build my own index. So how that works is just on the front cover of a book, page 99, write down 99 and then write down whatever was interesting there. So I don't really ever have to reread the entire book again. I've just made my own index of the interesting ideas. And that can go on quite deep into the pages. I may have an example here with Nietzsche's Human, All Too Human. I mean, it basically looks like this. And then I just carry on as far as it takes to make my own index. And then I got like some arrows in there and blah, blah, blah. But you can see like 85 has whatever idea I thought was cool. And then, I may go in and memorize some things that he says, Dane, do, whatever. I won't try to recite it now. Du sollst für deinem Freund nicht schön genug putzen. Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
And so with all of that said, I know you've written quite a few books, and I'm always asking people who come on, you're probably the most perfect person to ask, what would you recommend to people in two endeavors? Number one, to expand their memory if they've been excited by what this is, to get a good understanding. And then two, to expand their brain, right? I mean, if you're reading Nietzsche right now, you're looking to understand deeper philosophical concepts that will in turn better your life through that understanding. So what books would you recommend to lead you through those two things?
Well, for memory, I think you want to first think about what is it you want to do with your memory, because chances are there's a book that's going to be better for that. So I can recommend all kinds of memory books relative to what the individual wants to do. And then in terms of mental expansion, I think one of the most important things you can do is use the internet to find the cornucopia book that will lead you to many, many other books. So, for example, when I really wanted to beef up on metaphysics, I found the biggest, fattest, most scholarly book on metaphysics that I could find, and then went through the bibliography at the end of it and just started reading as much of the bibliography as I could so that it creates a solar system around the core textbook. And that will expand your mind. And all the more so if your memory is as optimum as possible. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just about any book on memory will help you get started and then just keep going. There's many, many other books beyond that. And treat memory as the discipline that it is, rather than, a one-time fix. Just, you would know as an athlete, it's not like, okay, so I learned how to do some push-ups. That's it. You come back to the push-ups over and over and over again. And memory is like that as well. There's always more to learn about memory. And you always have to watch your form, just like with squats and push-ups. I mean, I did something to my knee because I wasn't paying attention. I was trying to do the Hindu squats and somehow I wasn't paying attention to my knee. And, but it's the same thing with memory. I mean, you won't necessarily hurt your knee with memory, but you'll get more out of it if you pay attention to form. And the way to do that is to keep being a student of memory and keep coming back to what the art is. I read Bruno over and over and over again. I read other memory books. I think about what the other people say. I'm very blessed that I was able to speak at a certain time with Harry Lorraine. I met Tony Buzan. And so I have maybe a stronger image, but there's still cool people that you can meet that will rub off on you to give you sort of that. I mean, I said we should avoid maybe necessarily having this external image of the big other or something like that, but that's a different context.
Sure.
Here, like I built my own research, I built my own coaches, like I remember talked to everybody in memory on my podcast that I could and listened deeply to what they were saying and implemented that stuff. Anybody can go listen to those podcasts, but you can also, hire somebody's time. Tansel Ali, he does coaching all the time. He's amazing. He knows lots of stuff. And there's other people who will do coaching. So it doesn't have to be in a book, in other words, what I'm saying. Like it's a journey. The art of memory is alive. There are people who are dripping with passion for it, and get in touch with them and you can learn directly.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And that's actually really interesting, the way that you attacked metaphysics by finding a big giant book and then obviously going to the bibliography. I do something similar because of my varied interests. When I tend to read on a subject, because I tend to like to read multiple books, but what I will do instead of reading a book on physics and a book on whatever, Jamaica, right? They don't complement each other. I try to read from different angles and different perceptions on the same subject, and that in turn, without having been working on a memory like yours, it allows me, after you get done, to then mess with that in your head, and you can start to see also, even as you're going, how things connect. He disagrees here. Why? Well, these three guys seem to be all in the same, and this guy's just a little bit wild. Is he a little bit wild, or is he right? And these ones are just conforming to a certain thought. And then when you start to wrestle with the ideas within your head, you can start to find your own opinion within them, rather than just reading one book that tells you this is the way life is, and this is the way the subject is, and that's it, right? And so it solidifies my learning, and it allows for better recall, I've noticed. And even then, still, I have a notebook that I want to make sure, do I understand this? Because the greatest and most easy measure of your understanding is if you can explain it in a very simple manner to someone else. When someone says, what is a football? Well, if it's kind of round, if you can't explain it, you don't know it. I
wish that was true. I don't know. I think I do understand it a great deal about memory, but I don't know how to explain it simply, I don't think.
You know how to explain the use, though. You definitely understand how to get someone to utilize it. And I mean, that is what you do. Also, I know you have courses, you have books, you have things. You are able to convey how to use that thing quite well, which is saying something, because I know guys who are tremendous footballers who are awful coaches and just cannot explain. But it's also because they've never taken the time to inner look and understand, why do I turn like this when the ball comes to me? How come they won't convey it? What they'll do is just they'll scream at the kid or the person, like, how come you don't understand? I don't even have the same understanding as me after my 45 years. But yeah, so I think that's cool. I did, if you allow me one more question, Pythagoras. I have one book on him now. Actually, I have a few that mention him, but obviously he's only, a person that we attach to mathematics. I had no real understanding of this guy, loaded with mystery schools and an understanding of deeper philosophical concepts, because, in school it's just like, all right, a squared, b squared, all right, this guy, like, move on, like, get to know. Did you ever understand, or have you ever looked at his work, or just him as an individual?
Yes, and I think he was, well, I mean, the opinion doesn't matter, but if we were to compare him with Aristotle and let's say Socrates and Plato with the Symposium, Pythagoras and his school, I think, made some bad decisions, because it was closed, whereas Symposium was open. And this is the moment that we're in now, right? Like, we have all these kinds of people who are Pythagorean in the sense that, well, if you don't have library access, you can't read this scientific article. That's just garbage. And that I think is the Pythagorean mistake, because you have all these mysteries and da-da-da-da-da. But we know that people learn from having access to other people who have learned the thing without needing all of these rituals and so on, which is where we started our conversation today. It's like, well, how are you qualified to talk about this? Well, I don't know how I am, because we're living in this world of open access. Or we had a moment in history where access was so extraordinarily open, and now we have all these sovereign bodies that are working to make the internet as unfun as possible, where it doesn't even matter whether it's open or closed. You don't even want to go, because all you're going to get is like ad, or, paywall this and all that sort of stuff. So that's my thoughts on Pythagoras. I think he was amazing for sure. But when I think of all like the original OGs, I have a, well, he probably was mentally ill, right? Like he had some bizarre thing with beans or whatever. And probably Socrates was mentally ill too. I don't know. But at the end of the day, that's my general thinking about it. And I think we've seen that pattern between people ever since. It's just, okay, we're going to shroud all this stuff in mystery versus no. Get it out there. And it's one of the biggest, in my mind, it's one of the weirdest things that people associate Bruno with Masonry. I think Bruno would be horrified that we're going to have like all these secret things and so forth. Now I get the symbolic power. I get the framing effect and all that sort of stuff. But I think it's against itself in terms of how people really learn. And what's the first thing that happens with all those secrets? Somebody publishes it on the internet, right? And then more people learn. And the fear I think that people have at the end of the day is that they're going to get shown up because others have outpaced the master. But anyone who has mastery is dying to be outpaced as quickly as possible, right? The guru has to go. Period.
Right.
Because the gu, I believe, is darkness, right? Ru is light. The guru is always meant to be you, not the other guy. You're the one who brings the light into the darkness. And how the hell are you supposed to do that if you got Pythagoras saying, don't come in here if you don't know?
Yeah, that was the very first. I'd only read just the intro just to get an idea of what the book, and then just looking at what was required to be even considered for their mystery school is like just ridiculous. 1 year in silence and all this other, crazy stuff that you've got to do. And it's just like, wow. I mean, I understand some of the time more towards the medieval, maybe after a little bit before and after the Renaissance with the occultism having to be hidden. I understand the church is out for certain people and they want to spread knowledge. Or if you go back 2,000 years and you go into the Gnostics, it's like, all right, they're being persecuted. So you can't just walk around and say that. It would just literally everyone would be gone. So I understand that. But yeah, it is hilarious to watch us try and cover up knowledge, and then that a bunch of people come out and say it should be out, but it is really out anyway. And then now we have the internet and they're trying to censor us here and there, and that's so annoying. Every part of that is just, I get it, its power, but we always also are left with this little tinge, like I'm annoyed that I can't walk into the Vatican library. That's my thing. I had this discussion with Andrew Bustamante, who is a former CIA operative, and I'm just like, why can't I walk in? What do you have? And even if you do have it, what do you guys aren't using it? Or are you using it? Because there's always this little tinge of, right, well, we've got a bit more knowledge than you because we understand some stuff that you don't know. And we're utilizing that to maintain our massive control and power. And so you always have that little slight doubt, like maybe they do know this one thing. We always think that there's just like this one little thing. Right?
I don't think so.
And that's it. Yeah, but, I know, but that's the thing.
I wouldn't dismiss power so quickly. Nietzsche says something that's really important. He says that power has this weird quality, which is that it makes you want to have more power, right? And I think that we don't do enough to think about what power is and how it operates, so that we might defang it. And I mean, I'm not big on progress or anything like that, but if there is going to be progress, we have to contend with the seductiveness and the addictiveness and the structures that allow power to continue to be addicted to itself and grow, because it is possible that somewhere in the Vatican there is some secret. In fact, it's inevitable that there's some secret somewhere, right? But that's for the person who hasn't done enough reading and writing and thinking and so forth to understand the recursive nature of information, which is another area where Bruno was amazing. I think that he was a proto-information theorist, and he noticed recursion. And what that means is that like in set theory, you have this. Let me try to explain this in a way that will make some sense instead of just sounding like gobbledygook. There's a really interesting book, I think it's by P.D. Joule, on interpretation. And what Joule says there is that if you had 1 million reviews of Sense and Sensibility, they would not be unique. They would collect into sets. And there'd probably be like 3 to 5 different kinds of reviews of Sense and Sensibility. And so what Bruno says is, he says, if you do any amount of thinking and reading and studying about memory, you will come to the exact same conclusions as I have. It's just not possible for there to be anything outside of this, because information itself collects into sets, right? And I mean, we have Bayesian analysis now to sort of do this sort of stuff. So yes, there's probably something in the Vatican that you and I don't know. There's probably lots of things in the Vatican that you and I don't know, but we probably could figure out and predict with great accuracy what those things are like, right? And that's why power, I think, is so important, because we could think about what power is and what would it be like if we could actually, as a human species, deal with power differently and the characteristic of power that makes us want more of it. And so Nietzsche's not the only guy, but he's really powerful on the ideas of power. And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff, it gets territorialized by people who turn it into something other than it is. This happened with Foucault also. Like, his whole theory of power has been strangely transmogrified in a way that I don't think he would be very happy about. But I don't know. I mean, it takes all kinds. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think we do know what those secrets are. And Bruno was right. You think long and hard enough about it, there's nothing outside of this, so you'll figure it out.
That's where I tend to push myself towards that, because and I think when you do think, and that's the key to it, is thinking long and hard at it, or in getting yourself to an optimal state to consider what these could be. And what that means is all of the tools you have available to you, from dreams, from making sure that your memory is on point, from sleeping, from doing all this stuff, and then contemplating that, and then putting the attention that you have, your only real gift, to your attention, your awareness, that you can laser point on whatever it is that you would like. You could let it be all over the place, or, it could try and figure out, all right, what information do I have on this subject? And let me just run down, because one of the most incredible things I've noticed is that and there's that quote was it Einstein, the one who said you don't solve a problem using the same consciousness that created it? I believe that's an Einstein quote.
I think they attributed that to him, yeah.
In any case, we'll give it to him. He's kind of a smart guy. We'll give him that. And it's the same. What I think I also take from that is that looking towards a future aspect, looking to a subject that you want to dive into, you have no idea what you're going to think once you know, and once you've stretched your imagination and your knowledge there. The vantage point, once you understand the whole language of French, or when you're fluent in French, is different than what you're going to think as a beginner in French. You'll see a huge new landscape of things that you can do and tools that you can now use. And so it's hard to kind of profess what it is that you'll know, in the same sense that if you wanted to know what the Vatican truly had, well, right now you feel like you know nothing. What happens when you start to get a little bit of piece of that puzzle, and how far you can take it to the point that you could go past their knowledge, right? Because they haven't put some stuff together, right? I have a friend, Matt LaCroix, who's right now on his entire search within our project to put together the very first happenings of our religions, and the first cross, and all this, an incredible story. And I just touch on your point on power that gets misaligned and misconstrued from all of the thinkers. I think the person who is well known to speak about power now is Robert Greene. And so he has those books, 48 Laws of Power, 33 Strategies of War, et cetera, where he talks about that. And it's funny because it got banned in jails. And the book was banned in jails because, right, the wardens and the people there are saying, well, this is going to cause problems and all this. Well, people would write Robert a lot. And the people that were mainly writing him and thanking him for his book were the people that were marginalized and usually preyed upon. They were using it not to take over the jail, but to survive. And they were using it to gain personal power, to be independent. It's essentially kind of what you would want from someone that is powerful. Respect my space and respect me. I'm not trying to take your world over. Power for me isn't a control mechanism for me to be the new big top dog in the jail. That's not what I'm interested in. But I'm interested in understanding your rules for the game, how you're going to interact, in the world, and how to avoid those things, or, utilize them to keep myself safe. And so, he's a guy that I think I would love to have that discussion on, but I agree with you. It's something that we can't shy away from if we want to make progress, as you say.
Burroughs had a great line, William S. Burroughs, control seeks to control control. I've always loved that one.
With regards to what is possible to get people inspired with memory, can you tell us some things that you've taught yourself to do, and some of the work that a lot of the, maybe not ancient, and some ancient workers have done to profess this skill?
Well, I've used it in language learning quite a bit. I really don't think I would ever have learned any languages to any degree without memory techniques, if only because I find rote so tragically boring. and I just won't do it. I can't get myself to do it. I've memorized a lot of Sanskrit for meditation purposes, largely just because someone made this crazy claim that if you memorize enough Sanskrit, your thoughts will stop. And I said, that can't be. And so I tried it, and it turns out it worked. And what else have I done? I've had a very small competition experience for charity with Dave Farrow, who has 2 Guinness World Records, and I was blown away by how well I did, given the circumstances.
What did you do? What did you have to do? Sorry to interrupt, but what was the competition?
Well, it's kind of a longer story, but I was going there as like a memory journalist blogger to a competition. And, you know, just to make it a little more dramatic than it was, he wasn't going to let me out of there without competing. Like, he kept asking me, you want to compete? You want to compete? You want to compete? And I finally just said, listen, if we do it for charity and, you know, if I win, the money goes to charity, fine, no problem. He said, yeah, great. If I win, it'll go to charity also. And I was like, of course you're going to win. Anyway, I'm hungover. I've had this massive attack because I was drinking, because I'd given up drinking. And anyway, I was in Canada with friends, and I was having this massive attack of my arthritis that I get, especially with alcohol. And I was jet lagged because I couldn't sleep on the plane because I met this person who was just like, you know, hey, I'm manic depressive. And I was like, me too. So we just like chatted the whole time. And anyway, so I'm like, I'm so dead here. I'm going to die. There's people with cameras watching us compete with each other. And you don't have a real deck of cards. You just have all these cards that are displayed on a sheet of paper, and we're sharing it. I've never competed in my life before. I hardly even understand the rules. And we memorize all these cards as fast as we can with a 2-minute timer on. And at the end, we get to it, and I still don't quite understand the rules, but we're going to trade back and forth which cards we remember. And he says, you want to go first? And I'm like, what do you mean you want to go first? He's like, well, so he explains. And all the time's ticking, right? Already a minute has gone by just explaining. So I'm just like, oh my God, how am I going to get this series of cards out? Anyway, I try to compress this a little bit, but I almost slip on the first card. And I go, and I think it was Queen of Clubs. And I think I almost said 6 of Clubs, because later in the sequence was 6 of Clubs. And he's like, can I steal your point? And I was like, what do you mean steal my point? I said Queen of Clubs or whatever it was. And then he named a card, I named a card. And I'm so proud that in all of this condition, no practice with competition whatsoever, in so much pain, I managed to finish out this sequence of cards.
Wow.
And then we only have 2 minutes of recall also, a lot of which that we spent on just talking about the rules. Anyway, finally the 2-minute recall round comes out, and I didn't beat him, but I gave him a run for his money, and I didn't make a single mistake. And that to me was extraordinary. I'm always amazed by what memory techniques can do, but in that moment, I was extra amazed because I could have fallen flat publicly, you know, and just destroyed my rep. But really what ended up happening is Pharaoh later, he told me all this stuff about how he memorizes so fast and how he got his Guinness World Records. And I then started to use what he told me, or I adapted it. It was the greatest gift in the world, one I never would have gotten if I had fallen flat on my face. So it was just an amazing experience, ineffable, really.
That's incredible. I mean, yeah, my brief introduction into memory techniques, like I mentioned to you, was through learning about it in some book where they'd called it loci. And then I just kind of figured out what is this? And people are using memory palaces and they're chunking things together. And then there's a system in order to memorize numbers where you're creating stuff. So let's dig into that stuff just a little bit. Can you give us, because so many people now, after hearing that story and memorizing, how many cards did you memorize?
I think he did. I don't actually amount that I recited in the time that we had.
Sure.
So his was, I think I had 14 that I recalled correctly. And then
right.
He went on to keep reciting after I petered out, 24 or 28, something like that. Anyway, assuming that all the records were kept correctly as they're supposed to be according to the rule guideline book, he actually gave me the book on the memory competition guidelines, then it should be stored somewhere, or whatever that exact thing is. But I think that's what it was. I did 14 and he did 28.
Right. After just 2 minutes of looking at a giant list of cards, and then you just say, what is this? What is that?
Which is incredibly abstract compared to having, say, a deck of cards, which is a completely different practice, which is another reason why I found it so extraordinary, because it's a different thing. Having cards in your hand as opposed to, which direction do I go? This way, that way, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. So then what, for the people inspired by this, what would you tell them to do as their first memory method technique?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's so many options and things to do, but at the end of the day, I would say try to think about what's the one thing that you could memorize that if you had it in your mind tomorrow flawlessly, that would change your life, or better said, would allow you to change the life of a group. If you could, just recite this thing that you've learned, and then figure out what is the technique that's most likely to help you do that. So it might be the memory palace, but it might just be a simple linking memory technique. But at the end of the day, the memory palace is the best thing to start, in my view, because really memory palaces are a link method, and they're just the strongest one. They're kind of like the link method in which all other memory techniques can be used inside of them.
Can you explain the memory palace technique? I mean, so it's not abstract for people.
Yeah. And I'll try to do it in a way that doesn't make it even more abstract, because I love it so much. But, the simplest way to understand it is if you were to go and take your shoe and put it in the fridge, you're going to remember that your shoe is in the fridge, right? And then if you think, oh man, I'm memorizing the Sanskrit and there's this word, kalusham or whatever, kalusham jiva, something like this, right? And then you go, wow, okay, so there's a shoe in my fridge and it's with the magician Bill Kalush. Well, you think back to your fridge where the shoe is, and it just makes it easier to remember kalusham jiva or whatever it is, that you're memorizing. Because the location is like a canvas on which to paint, or it's a place to revisit in your mind. It's like Sherlock Holmes, I must go to my mind palace. Like he's going to the place where there's an image or there's an association that triggers the target information. So whatever it is you want to memorize, you can, if you know where your fridge is, you are already an intermediate memory master.
Oh. And one of the things that I found most interesting in watching your videos was the fact that you stressed that they understand a memory palace isn't something that you need to memorize. If you have to memorize the palace or where your fridge is, then you probably shouldn't be using this as your memory palace, right?
Exactly.
And I think all of us know the house we grew up in, or or the places we frequent a ton, whether that's a school or work, and these places make perfect. But I find it really incredible when you do these methods, what is possible, because not just simple, banal things like a grocery list, which is in some of the books that I've seen, it's like that's how they start people. It's, we usually write something down for that. But there's a complete other method, something that has to get used differently for numbers, right? Could you maybe touch on what one could do for numbers? I know this is very hard or different, let's say, but how does that work?
I think it's hard if you want to make it hard. There's all kinds of people who come into things and they form mental pictures, but I would just encourage anybody who has any overwhelm whatsoever to just try and think, what is this overwhelm? Where is it coming from? Because often in our implicit memory, we have learned to be overwhelmed because we've seen other people be overwhelmed. But all memory instructions, even the most obscure Giordano Bruno book that is hard to read, and it's, got these labyrinthian sentences, and he's not even talking about memory techniques for the first 80 pages. It's just like, where's this is hard coming from? It's probably not coming from you. It's probably coming from your implicit memory training that you saw somebody else struggling with a thing, and you learned that's the way to respond. I could say everything that I've read is hard, but when I got to stuff that really challenged me when I was in grad school, which is most of it, I just read it out loud to get through it. I didn't sort of let it seem hard. So the number systems are not hard. They're actually really, really easy. But I understand if people feel that they're difficult. But I think part of the answer is to look at what your mind is doing, because we're really talking about letters and numbers. That's it. So the simplest way to get into numbers is to use a number rhyme system. 1 is a bun, 2 is a shoe, 3 is a bee, 4 is a door, that kind of thing. And then work on memorizing a list of things. So if you meet William and you say 1 is a bun, we imagine William wrapped up in a bun. And if your last name is John, then that's the second thing we want to memorize. So 2 is a shoe. So we can either go in my shoe where Kalusham is, or we can have, your last name. I'm not sure exactly how I would connect John with a shoe, but, that sort of thing. And then if you throw out some piece of information at me and 3 is a bee, then I have a bee stinging it, right? And you can do that abstractly in your mind, or you can do it in a location. So station 1 in a memory palace, it has a bun on it, and then you link everything with that. Now that's a way to get started with memorizing numbers, because let's say you have to memorize 7, 8, 9. Well, 7 kind of looks like, 7 is my friend Evan, who's playing Stairway to Heaven. So now I have him doing something with a gate, and then he's drinking wine when he gets on the other side of the gate, because 9 is wine and it's fine and all that sort of stuff. So you could rhyme the numbers and make little stories out of them. This is a very, very painful way to do it, by the way, but it's the easiest way to learn how to associate numbers with other things, striking images like buns. You can use guns if you prefer. It's a rhyme sort of structure. Next level, there's something called the major, and what it is it's like, remember those old phones back when, maybe they still have them, but phones that had a number and then ABC under one?
Yeah, of course. Mm-hmm.
Well, if you are willing to do a little bit of homework, you can associate each digit from 0 to 9 with consonants, very specifically consonants. So the major system classically is 0 is a soft C, S, or Z, 1 is a T or D, 2 is an N, 3 is an M, 4 is an R. I will only complete it if you want me to, but the idea is you're going to make words. So if you have 11, then you know that 1 is a T or D, so you could do what I've done, which is make the word toad. And then every time I see 11, I see a toad. Now, not just an abstract toad, but the Warner Brothers toad. Hello, my honey. Hello, my baby. Hello, my downtown gal. Whatever that song goes. I don't even remember the song because I haven't memorized it, but it's something like that from the Warner Brothers thing. So then now 11 is alive, right? So if we have 11, 89, all this stuff, well, 89 is V and P. So I have a viper, but a very specific viper, which is Cobra Commander, because he has that viper on his chest or on his helmet or whatever. So now 1189 is going to be the toad kicking Cobra Commander, and that's just going to remind me of 1189. And there are people who have done thousands of digits of pi just like this. They have these images built like this. It's called a 00 to 99 PAO when you build out your whole system. This is how a lot of people memorize playing cards. It gets more sophisticated than that. We can go as deep down the rabbit hole as you please, but that's the basics of it.
Yeah, I mean, incredibly fascinating. What I love about it is that it also triggers you to use your imagination in a way that's sometimes underutilized in the modern world. So because you spend a lot of time visualizing, or maybe not a lot of time, but because you visualize, it makes it yours, right? Because you've gone a step further, not just any toad, not just a random toad, but this specific toad, right? And this specific toad doing or singing this jig, dance, whatever, and that then implants it into your memory. And I want to touch on, because obviously we have a very big language channel and following on our other YouTube channels, and one of the most important ways to learn words is one thing we stressed, just like you hate rote memory, is you can't learn a list of vocab in a new language without context. It's very hard for you to do that. There's nothing for you to peg it to if it doesn't come from a story you just learned or a field of interest of yours. It's almost worthless, And so, how would you go about learning new words in a language that you're studying and linking this up?
Well, there's different ways to do these things, but what I worked out when I had to learn in a very fast order is to get a dictionary and have a memory palace for every letter of the alphabet relative to that language. This sounds like madness, but the thing is if you have a memory palace for every letter of the alphabet, and then you think, okay, so there's all these words that start with AB. Well, Abraham Lincoln would be pretty fun to follow around, and then you just place these words on the places where he is in the memory palace. Abraham Lincoln is here, Abraham Lincoln is there. So it could be, just to make this concrete, 𝗝𝗛𝗡 in German. Abraham Lincoln is looking at art in the laundry room, as I believe I had when I memorized that. And Tigger's tail is coming out of the dryer. And so 𝗝𝗛𝗡, Abraham Lincoln looking at art, Tigger's tail. This is an odd, abnormal thing to do, and that's the meaning of the word. Then you move to the next place, 𝗝𝗛𝗛𝗡, for, like a cleaning fluid. Not a word that I never necessarily used all the time, but that's how I memorized it in a list. And so you move on to the next letter until you get to Z, and then you have Sarisin and Sugamauert and Sufal and Serfal and Serfallen and Serbreshless and Serbreshless-kite, blah, 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 blah. And it just racks and stacks real nice because you're using logic, essentially, and the art of combination, or ars combinatoria. So really, I think one of the problems students encounter is that they're only ever taught the memory palace, and they're only ever taught linking, but they're never taught was what used to be called ars combinatoria, literally learning how to combine things at a phonic level to get to sound and meaning as quickly as possible within their memory palaces. So that's how I would suggest doing it. Looking for similarities. It's like mental Lego. The memory palace is the foundation, and the images are the Lego that help you pin what you're trying to memorize in place.
I think that was my original issue with using this. This is years ago, more than 15, when I initially had tried it. I didn't have that. I just knew things without being able to link them, like you said, just having that peg and being able to build it. And so I couldn't figure out how to incorporate that into my language training and, vocab. One thing I want to jump to as well is, because once we go from learning a language, I've seen some videos, and I'm not in school now anymore, but how to study for a test or how to learn from a book, right? I love to read just like you. I know we discussed that, and I have a couple notebooks where I jot notes and things that I think, and reducing ideas once I understand them, right? That's the whole point for me, especially when reading nonfiction books and sometimes fiction books, is that you want to take something from that, implement it into your life, or make sure that you understand it. So how would you give, what do you do, actually? Because I know you're a reader. How do you incorporate, what you learn from a book and memorizing it?
Well, let me preface this by just saying that sometimes people think that I'm just putting memory palaces on a pedestal. And when I talk about it, it's like some hammer for every nail. I really love the memory palace technique, but I really don't care about it at the same time. Like, it's just a tool, right? So I don't want to put too much emphasis on it. The reason why it's so cool, and what I would recommend students to do, let me just add something to the language learning component, because it applies to studying from textbooks. A lot of people will worry, well, that's never going to scale. I have to have 26 memory palaces, and then I'm going to have these individual words and da-da-da-da. But the cool thing is that if you would establish this core set of vocabulary, whether it's in a language or whether it's in a field of expertise, so in that case, it's not a vocabulary, but a nomenclature, let's say, if you would just establish that, then you can build on it. So just as an example, in a B memory palace, you have bereit in German, ready, right? And you can then add a phrase to that core word that's established somewhere in a memory palace. Then if you go and learn Mandarin, and then you learn, let me see if I can get my tone correct here, Zhuan Bei, which is, Ni Zhuan Bei, how are you ready? Well, bereit and Bei, just an accident. They have this, Zhuan Bei, have this B in it, right? And so now you just add that to the original memory palace. So it scales like crazy if you have this alphabetical foundation, as I described. Now let's go to textbook and students. Again, it's not just about the memory palace, but if you're going to use it, you're looking for that same kind of thing. So now let's look at it a little bit differently, though. You got a book, it's got 10 chapters, and you just say to yourself, I know there's a lot of material here, but I'm going to make one pass through this, and I'm going to select 10 things from each chapter, or 3 things from each chapter. That's it. That's all I'm going to focus on. And then you have, however you design your memory palaces, I suggest the alphabetical network for everything, because you come across a fact and you say, this is the first fact. So the memory palace for this chapter is going to be alphabetically linked. or you could have numbered memory palaces or what have you. Now you get your 3 points or your 10 points for that chapter into memory palaces or a memory palace, and then you use recall rehearsal to get it into long-term memory, and you move on to the next one and the next one and the next one. So you essentially have like different memory palaces for each chapter. But to be bulletproof, because I like to be bulletproof when I do stuff as much as possible, which is sometimes I fall flat on my face. But anyway, I like to get the information out on index cards before I even memorize it, to be as efficient as possible. So index cards, there's a thing called the 𝗪𝗪𝗡 method. The CIA used it to catch 𝗪𝗪𝗡, or it was part of how that they did that. That's how I learned it. My grad professor in a course called bibliography, she was like, you really need to learn how to use these index cards because the CIA used them so that we could use them too. And I said, yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, you extract onto the card. Then let's say you got 100 cards and you wean out the stuff. You don't necessarily memorize all of it, but you go, these are the big points. And then it's the same thing as that 𝗪𝗪𝗛 and then adding 𝗪𝗪𝗛𝗡, where you just go, oh, this point can be added now to this thing that I've already memorized. So you have some crazy image, and then you just compound on new things. The key, though, is that you have to optimize things so that you can do recall rehearsal, which is a spaced repetition pattern that will help usher the information into long-term memory. So there are issues like clutter. There's issues like ghosting. There's all kinds of problems that you can run into, but you destroy them all in language learning or in studying with continual reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So the ninja strategy, really, whether it's language learning or studying for an exam from a textbook, is to keep reading around what you're doing. Read above and beyond what other people are doing. Speak a lot about it with as many people as you can, in the same way that you would speak a language with as many people as you can. Listen frequently to additional podcasts, interviews, what have you. When you're talking with people, you'll naturally be listening. Write summaries. Getting it out through your hand is golden. So that's how I would suggest doing things. The memory palace is part of a tool or a set of tools that you want to get as many levels of processing as you can. Then you sit and you're as bulletproof as you're going to get.
Could you, because I don't know this story, could you tell us how the CIA used this 𝗪𝗪𝗡? Could you tell us what that is? I don't know it.
So the 𝗪𝗪𝗡 is literally, so zettel means note in German, and Kasten means box. So a zettelkasten technique is having cards in a box. And I don't know the full story of the 𝗪𝗪𝗡 thing, but what I understand of it is that they had so many data points and they're trying to find this mole, and they were losing track of their own data. So part of what they did was that they got it onto cards and they put them in boxes and they sorted them and sifted them and screened them in such a way that they not only were better able to find their information, but as I understand it, it started to crystallize the knowledge in their heads a little bit differently, because you're getting a spaced repetition effect that is aided by a kind of alphabetical or numerical organization of where your cards are in space. So it's almost like offloading the memory palace technique onto cards that are organized into spaces. And then that leads to insights and aha moments. But I may be going too far in speculating how that worked. But if memory serves, it was one of the pivotal things that helped them have these moments where they worked it out and figured it out.
Okay, listen, I want to cut it here because I think we have a good chunk of information. It's fascinating, all of this. And I know, as I mentioned, I think it would be amazing to do a project for the language learning world to simplify things, to reduce things down to to get people completely enticed. I think the goal being, if we can get a bunch of people enticed on this, if they get a little hooked on how it works and they see the results on that, they're going to expand out into wanting to know who Giordano Bruno is and what else they can do with it and how it affects their greater lives. And they're going to be telling people. And so, I'm excited about that. But for the last point, where should we send people that are fascinated with what they've heard from you today?
To the index Librorum Prohibitorum. No.
Okay.
That's the library of the banned books. send them to the Vatican. No, I'm at magneticmemorymethod.com. And yeah, I mean, I have books on Amazon, and I have strange
We'll link to all of your things.
strange little like
Yeah.
memory detective novel stuff that you can get into if you want to have an adventure and read a story instead of learn the art of memory from a story instead of, some book or course. I got all kinds of stuff going on.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, Anthony, I really appreciate it. It's been awesome. I can't wait to do it again. And we'll link to everything that you've got out there.
Perfect. Well, thanks. It was amazing. I had a great time.